All right, welcome to another totally rewarding chats. I'm here with Mr. Ryman. How are you?
Mr. Ryman, I need to look for my father behind me if you're saying something like that. Like,
Well,
I'm not a
maybe I'm
mister.
practicing. World at Work's coming. We know you're going to rock the bow tie at World at Work.
That's
So I'm
right.
practicing for the Mr. Ryman
All
type
right. That's fair.
thing going. Is that fair?
That's fair.
Yeah, so I got to practice.
Okay.
I'm stoked to have Phil Strazzulla. How are you?
Doing well. Thanks for having me, guys.
Great. So we're going to be talking today about vendor selection, which is kind of interesting. So, Phil, I'll have you do your bio in a second. You do a lot of vendor selection. Paul has been in house and is now talks a lot about vendor selection. And for the past 30 plus years, I've been the vendor. So I'm a little concerned about how this is going to go, being the guy literally in the
You're the
middle.
problem, Sean. You're the problem,
Yeah.
Sean.
That's not untrue, but not just around tech. Um, so Phil, why don't you give us kind of your background of where you've been, and then also what you're doing right now, and specifically if you want to talk about what you're doing around vendor selection. Oh, we lost your voice. This is it.
Investing.
There you go.
Oh,
Oh, I think you're
Was that?
back now. There you go.
Oh,
You
okay.
have to start over.
your
All right.
voice went
Okay.
out right when you started speaking.
Will do. I started my career off working in venture capital, doing early stage software investing.
Huh.
I always wanted to start a business. I went to business school at Harvard Business School, taught myself how to program, was messing around with a bunch of ideas. And one of those became an employer branding SaaS, basically by accident. And that's kind of how I got into HR 15 years ago. So I ran that with a friend of mine. He still runs the business, actually. It still powers career websites and employee stories and stuff like that. I started doing fractional work. So as a fractional talent acquisition consultant, biggest claim to fame is helping a company go from 300 to 3,000 employees in about 15 months. And I started Select Software Reviews in 2019. Our North Star is to help companies find and buy the right HR software. So that could be something as core as HCM. It could be something as niche as an AI sourcing tool. We do that through our reviews. We've got a newsletter with 150,000 people on it. We do webinars every month. And then we also have a team of advisors that you can use for free. You can talk to them, get advice from them. And if you want, they can match you with vendors that are relevant to what you are trying to accomplish for your organization.
Okay. So before we dive in, we do kind of a human captcha test. We have the speed round of questions for you. These are very tricky, Phil. So, are you a coffee or tea person?
Definitely coffee.
Okay. Now, the follow-up question that has happened, are you a coffee snob?
Not at all. We do have a Breville barista. So I make an Americano. I make two Americanos every day. One is a half calf in the morning because I'm very caffeine sensitive. And if I have a full on like Americano, I'll go crazy. And then after between 10 and 12, I have a fully decaf Americano. And that's my regimen every day.
Now, I
That's
don't know if you can answer not a coffee snob followed by half barista machine.
Well, it's more of a caffeine sensitivity question. So like I'll
yeah.
go to Dunkin' Donuts. Like if we're on a road trip, I'll do the gas station coffee. You know what I mean? Like I don't
Okay.
really care actually. And I actually prefer variety. We have the Breville because of my wife is more of a connoisseur or a bit particular. And then for me, like I just if I have like a shot of caffeine in the morning, I'm just like jacked up and I can't deal with it. So decaf is like 30% as much. And so you can kind of do the math on the weighted average of the first drink versus the second drink. And that's my regimen.
All right, we're
that,
going to be
that
looking for, shout out to Breville. Um,
the unofficial sponsor of Totally
yeah,
Rewarding
Yeah.
we'll
Chats.
have
Affiliate
to go
link in
back.
bio.
Sports team of choice.
Penn State wrestling team. So I was a wrestler.
Hmm.
They're by far the best. And they've introduced a new philosophy. Wrestling used to be like you grind hard, you try to rip the other guy's arm off, and it's life or death. And like,
I don't know. Is that
I lost your audio
you
again.
lost your audio again? Now the concerning part is going to be while it comes back on. How bad did it get after rip your arm off? Yeah, we
yeah,
have. How bad did it
exactly.
get after rip your arm off? Then it went it that it basically censored you.
So it got to life and death. That's how bad
Okay.
it got.
Okay.
That's far.
Um, and the Penn State guys are like, have fun, it's just wrestling, like it's just the Olympics, like it's more important to be a great father and husband and all this other stuff. And these guys are heads and tails about everybody else. I find it like very interesting, and it's also a bit inspirational. And I think you got look at like Scotty Scheffler in golf or a lot of these other athletes that are at the highest level. And they're like, I don't keep track of all the titles. I don't keep track of where I just go out and I have a good time. And I'm so
Hmm.
grateful to be here. And I think that gets you to the highest level performance, no matter what you're doing.
That's
Good point.
it is an interesting I'm a proud Chicagoan, right? Grew up watching 80s Bulls, right? It's a stark contrast to the Michael Jordan excellence model, which is like, I am out to beat you down every time we play, and I'm going to go 150% to, it's always competitive, right? Like
Yeah.
he can't have dinner without racing, right? So it's like the opposite spectrum, similar outcomes. These are dominant performers, right? But definitely different mindset. It's a fascinating pickup. I would not have equated that with wrestling. I know nothing about wrestling, but it's interesting to hear, particularly in a sport like that. Yeah, fascinating.
So this one, you're going to make a friend and lose a friend right here, Phil. You have a weekend away. Would you rather have a posh weekend away, or are you going to go rough it and camp in the woods?
Definitely posh. I've roughed it a few times in my life, and
It's
it's
overrated.
it's a good time. Don't get me wrong, but like I'd much rather go to the Four Seasons than be out in the Four
Very
Seasons.
PC though. It's a very PC. I went a couple times. Don't get me wrong, it's fine, but I
Right.
never want to go back. That's
Well,
kind
here
of heard that. Yeah.
so here's the thing: is like you sort of like do this stuff that you're from the people you're surrounded by, and so my significant other, if we stay at a 3-star hotel, that's like a big deal. That's like, what are we doing here? And growing up, like my friends and I, we like camped out on an island once and like rode out there. And at the end of it, we were all sort of like, all right, this is good. I'm glad we did this. So
Check and
one
move
of,
on.
one of my best friends is like an ex-Marine, and like we used to go camping in business school, and that was awesome. That was like a lot of fun, but you got to be with the people who are like, this is great, versus the people who are like, I
Yeah.
can't believe we have to
Yeah.
start a fire now.
I like Paul, but Paul and I will not be camping.
We will never camp together because I don't
Yeah.
camp. I am using the I'd rather be at the Four Seasons than in the Four Seasons. That is the new way we're going to ask this question going forward. That's quality.
Yeah,
You place you'd like to vacation that you haven't been.
that's a phenomenal question. I would love to do the safari in
Hmm.
South Africa.
Do you want to do it as a posh excursion
That's
or rough?
absolutely how most safaris are. Like,
I know.
Yeah, I think
Or just grab a backpack and go. The follow up. Just kidding. You don't
just
have to
run
answer. I just was
fast.
like,
Run
I was like,
fast. The cheetahs won't mind.
right. Just pack a gun. You'll be fine. You know what you're doing, right? You know all about the different
have
habitats.
a picture of Paul watching me run now from the animals from his
That's
posh, vehicle. And the last one, are you crunchy or creamy peanut butter?
Crunchy.
Okay, that is the minority, by the way.
Oh
Um,
wow.
yeah.
Yeah, I can tell by the shelving.
Um, yeah. In the
Decaf
show.
coffee and crunchy peanut butter. It's a small subset of the
Yeah.
population.
True story. That's actually, to be honest, I never noticed. So I wanted to start. We have this interesting dynamic of you're doing all of HR, so the big Venn circle, and Paul and I live really much in the comp tech space.
Mm.
And so when we're talking about vendor selection, because we'll talk a lot about technology and methodologies and other stuff, how do you see the best practices, or what are the things you kind of preach to people about when they're starting their journey on selecting software?
The biggest things for me that HR teams many times struggle with are, how does this impact the business, and how do I get internal stakeholder alignment? So I think a lot of folks in their gut, which is actually a really good way to understand where to focus, know that, we need better comp data, our recruiting process is broken, onboarding is terrible, employer branding, whatever it is for your organization. And I think the step beyond that is sort of crystallizing, why is that the case? What does it look like today? What are the problems? How are those problems impacting the business? What's the future state? And what's the future state in an ROI sort of methodology? And then how do I get the key people around me to buy into this before I start doing the work? Because a lot of times what we see is people, they'll go off and they'll do a full, research report on the applicant tracking system landscape. And here's the one I picked and blah, blah, blah. And the CFO is like, well, we don't have the budget. So I don't know why you did all that. Or, I actually think we should use X vendor because we use it at our old company. So we're actually just going to do that. But like, thanks for doing, 3 months worth of work. So those are the two biggest buckets. The business case stuff is tough because I think a lot of folks in HR they don't have the training, and they also are very focused on the people aspects versus the sort of analytical business aspects. Like when we talk about things like EBITDA, even still, a lot of HR leaders are like, "What are you talking about?" Right?
Mm.
And so what I encourage people to do is, one, you can actually use LLMs now pretty effectively to build some of these business cases, but find some in your organization, just kind of speak spreadsheet and get them to help you articulate what you need to do in order to translate your gut feeling into a short presentation as well as a financial model.
You used an interesting phrase, the speak spreadsheet. I think when I think about comp, and I'm super like micro focused in there, those are things where spreadsheets are actually a viable technology alternative, right? Whereas like you're not going to do your ATS in a spread. Maybe some companies do, but God forbid you try to,
Yeah.
track applicants or manage your employer brand. So like the HR space has a like technology often like the replacements for a new system is very different than comp, where it's a spreadsheet takeout almost always. So I guess does that change the mindset of those buckets at all when you're thinking of most comp organizations are doing comp reviews in a spreadsheet. They're managing market data in a spreadsheet. They're analyzing outcomes in a spreadsheet. Like how does that view differently, I guess, just given how you've framed those problems? Is it any
Yeah.
different? Is it kind of the same issue?
I'd phrase it, Paul, as I'd also add to that if you want to put it in the mix. Do you see a large difference when people are kind of moving a switching costs and selecting a software to I'm going from free, right?
Yeah.
So the problem with, Excel is that shit's free. And so
Yeah.
there isn't a line item. They have to go to the CFO and like create a line item. And so I'd split it into two
Yeah,
different
good
pieces,
point.
kind of a long-winded question to, adding on top of Paul's.
It's free, but the cost is actually extremely large in many cases. So I just posted about this today actually on LinkedIn, where my colleague just talked to a head of talent acquisition, 5,000 employee company. They got three price quotes for a new applicant tracking system. One was for 130 grand, one was for 125,000, and one was for $5,000. And they went with the $5,000 company. It's an obvious, insane mismatch of this. The ATS that they picked is for like your first ATS when you're hiring 30 people a year, and it's all the same type of person. There's no international and all this stuff, right? And so the cost of that $5,000 a year ATS is going to be millions and millions of dollars, without a doubt. And that person's probably going to get fired. Uh, and so like going from a spreadsheet, whether that's for comp, whether that's even something like an HRIS or onboarding or whatever, you're losing money uh, through increased attrition, through paying people the wrong amounts, through losing people in interview processes, and the cost of that is super real. The challenge again is, how do you take that cost and make it into something that hits the P&L? How do you bridge that gap? And I think that's where a lot of HR teams really struggle. If we all know that when people leave your organization too fast with institutional knowledge and social capital, or when you don't hire somebody, you have to start over, or you have to use a recruiter, or whatever, like these things cost money. I think the challenge is how do you calculate how much money that probably cost you.
So what has been the best practice there? Because I know, um, last year at our Big Conference World at Work, on one of the panels, and just couldn't, you had to tell all the comp people in the audience that their time doesn't matter. Like nobody actually gives a shit about you and your time. And so, how are you seeing companies create ROI? Like, what are they measuring and what is actually translating from time? Because I think we see a lot of people in our space, and I don't know, that's probably down at the line level recruiter as well, right? Where they just have a couple of metrics. Time is kind of their thing. And how do I save time? How do you see them
Yeah.
translating that into something that ROI that a CFO and the C-suite cares about, because we know they don't know about their time. I know you mentioned just a couple of them, but like, are there other ways, or what are some winning ways you've seen people make that story?
For sure. So I think time matters when you're talking about increased headcount. And so if we're talking about, hey, we need to add FTEs to the recruiting org or the HR org or whatever, obviously, and we don't have to because we have a system now. That's great. If we get to keep people in the HR org because we have better systems and we can decrease rote work, that's great. Think about one of the biggest ROI is from time to fill. So think about an organization that has a time to fill of 40 days and they hire, let's say, one salesperson per year that has $1 million quota. So it's 2,000 bucks a day, and you're able to decrease it to 30 days. So that's 10 extra days that you get that person in their seat times 2,000 bucks a day. That's 20,000 bucks. And then what happens if you're hiring 10 salespeople? That's $200,000. What happens if you're hiring 100 salespeople? That's $2 million. So time to fill is a big one. Churn obviously is a massive one. There's all sorts of studies around this about how much organizations lose when people leave the organization. And I think those are all, for the most part, true. Cost to hire is a big one. So decreasing uh, basically, the internal and external costs because you're able to run a seamless recruiting process. So those are some of the bigger things that can have a large impact. Think about, like, decrease company churn by 1%. Even at a small organization, that becomes a really, really big number really fast. And so if you can do that by, hey, we have like more aggressive compensation plans, or we have an employee engagement tool that lets us to, in real time coach the right managers or identify people that maybe need extra love, or, we have better career pathing or whatever, right? There's a million ways that HR can impact this stuff that is going to pay for itself 10x over.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because I think when I've talked to several people on comp, but comp people are very specific, right? For all the right reasons, right? Paul definitely is bilingual in spreadsheet.
That's a
Like, you
language
get
I
very
speak.
specific,
Yeah.
and I've told him on this churn thing in particular, you go into it and lose the battle to win the war, because they're like, well, I don't know exactly how much churn is, but it's okay if you go into the C-suite and you're like, I think churn is 2%. They're like, there's no way. It's definitely more like one. You're like, fine, you're 100% wrong. You're off by a lot there, but you still win, because 1%, to your point, is a giant number. So you've just got them commit to a giant number. But I think that
Hmm.
fear of like, well, how do I get the exact right number for churn? Nobody has the exact right number for churn. Time to fill gets hard because you get on board, like everyone can poke holes in all that data. But I don't think
Hmm.
anybody that I've seen has been like, you know what, churn is great. Churn makes us money. Like, that's a good thing. So I think it's like, and I think part of it is just putting it out there. Phil, to your point, like, just get it out there. It is a
Yeah.
thing, and then debate on the detail.
And some of it's storytelling, right? Like, to your point,
Mm,
it's like we might not know if it's 1.8 or 1.7 or whatever, right? But like, if you and your gut know, probably the exec team knows, and if you can tell the story around, here's what's broken, here's where we're seeing it. We're seeing it in Glassdoor reviews and people leaving and one-on-ones and end of year and exit interviews and blah blah blah. Here's where it could be if we just like implement this new process with a new data stream, and here's where we kind of think we could go, right? Like, here's how we could change that number a little bit. And if we play that math out on what that probably and how that impacts the business, the number is $2 million, right? And we're going to pay 40 grand for this thing, right? So it's like, even if we're off by a lot, we
yeah,
still are
Yeah.
money good.
yeah,
And that story is either going to resonate or not. And if it
Yeah.
resonates, then it doesn't matter if you're off by 10 basis points.
Yeah. That's when I was in-house before starting my firm, I had some very skeptical CFOs. Like, in an okay way, but boy, they wouldn't let you get away with anything. And what I learned is that acknowledging that you are going to make up a number, but
Mm,
there's no way that it's too low. Right? Like, that became the entree. Like, I can't prove to you that this problem, like by using this bad HR system instead of this good HR system, I can't prove to you that it's going to be 1% better. But there's no way
mhm.
it's less. Like, it kind of acknowledging the imperfection was a really helpful Like, it disarms the natural skepticism of the audience. Because I think what you said is right. Like, they either buy into it or they don't. And let's not get too lost in the numbers. There are numbers, but like we're not typically the ROI isn't razor thin. Like, is this going to be sort of EBITDA positive or not? It's
Right.
this is a 5xer. Like whether it's 4 or 6 or 10 or 2 kind of doesn't matter. Like, do we agree it's value creating? So acknowledging that lack of precision, I think, was helpful. It's particularly in the comp world, just because it's really hard to, if I do this, then I will get that. It's just too big of an ecosystem, right? But it doesn't take away from the point that you just got to find a way to compel the story, and be as precise as you need to be. But it's not going to be perfect, and acknowledging that sometimes just helps overcome that natural skepticism.
And I think a lot of times there's a big problem that a lot of HR teams have, which is in their organization, many times they're viewed as a cost center that's not strategic. And so when they go to the CFO and say, "Hey, can I do this?" The answer is like, "Hell no. Like, why would we ever let you do that?" Right.
Right. That's money.
And yeah, exactly. Like, we want to give you as less money as possible and make you do as much work as possible. Does that sound good to you? And that's unfortunately like the way that a lot of organizations think. I think there's a couple hacks around that. So one is you can get people from outside your org to be on board with this problem. So if you're trying to fix the employer brand of the company, you'll be shocked by how many people care about that. And you can get a person from marketing and a person from ops and a person from product to basically be like your board of directors as you go through this process. You don't have to do much work. They're bought into the problem. They help you with the solution. And then when you go pitch, it's like, well, Mary from marketing and Joe from product and both, like, they're all on this too. And they're banging the table too. So that gives you the internal
Mm.
juice. The other thing that I think a lot of HR teams don't do is like, they're not very good at bragging about stuff. So they might implement something that works pretty well, and then nobody even hears about it because, and people are like, I can't do my PTO and ADP, and I'm so mad about it. I hate, I'm blaming HR, and they never hear about, we implemented this performance management system, and like now we're all aligned, and compensation makes more sense, and like how you're reviewed, and your one-on-ones are more structured, and blah blah. And like, here's the whole case study around like what we did. That stuff uh, can give you just more internal juice so that when you go to the CFO for the next thing, they're like, oh, this is the amazing person that did that performance management system. We want to keep them happy. And I have trust in their ability to allocate resources in our organization.
That's funny. Comp is, I think I've said it publicly to Paul knows, they are their own worst enemy by far. They just magically make shit happen, and never tell anyone about it. And and HR as a whole, I think too, like the payroll department is the one I joke about. When was the last time you sent a note to payroll and said, "Hey, bro, thanks. I've got paid 52 weeks in a row." Like nobody ever sends that note. They only send a note when stuff goes bad, and they
Exactly.
don't brag about that stuff. I want to spin a little bit to, let's assume now we've, taken all your hints and we got approval, right, to do this. What are the steps, or how are you seeing companies pragmatically look at the tools and
Mm.
differentiate between the tools, features, functionality, and there's always price. But how are you seeing them kind of do that walk the best way possible to line up vendors side by side?
I think it's a real struggle. Most HR teams are dealing with buyers every single day and they're under resourced to begin with. And it's like, oh, here's this strategic thing I'd have to do over the next 6 months. And it's always, I'll do it tomorrow, I'll do it tomorrow. And then you're a quarter away from your renewal and you're like, oh, crud. And you start just like taking random demos. You're getting Instagram ads and you're like, yeah, I'll do that one. You're asking people who are in your network who have like no idea what they're talking about. And they're like, oh, yeah, I love this tool, hate this tool. But, and you're just getting like all these like really low value signals. So I'm extremely biased. You should talk to one of our advisors and you should get a lot of high value signals, and you can leverage our database that we've built so that you can understand like what you should actually be looking at. And then you want to be really rigorous about your vendor demos and selection criteria. So I always recommend put together a spreadsheet, your must haves, nice to haves, and then pricing. And also, I like to put in how much I liked the experience because I think that
Mm.
good sales reps can work anywhere. and they just show up to a company and they're like, "Hey, here's my comp plan. Here's what I actually did. Hire me." And they want to work at companies that have high LTVs because they can make a lot more money in commission. And companies that have high LTVs have good brands and good products. Have good onboarding. They basically like have a lot of value there for their customers. So it's not perfect science, but like that kind of correlates with, are you going to be taken care of afterwards? So just take really good notes. And a hack that I found is that you can send the notes to the sales folks and just say like, "Hey, did I get this right?" And you can black out your notes from all the other vendors, but I actually keep the vendor names in there. So it's like, oh, we're competing against like our buddies over here at this company and this company. Like, we got to be aggressive on price. We got to be on our game. It's kind of like going to a Toyota dealership and it's like, hey, I'm looking at the RAV4, but I'm looking at the CRV, right? And the RAV4 salesperson's like, all right, well, this person's doing their research. I got to be competitive here. I can't just give them the sticker price. I got to really up my game. So some
That's
few tips and
interesting.
tricks.
From a vendor standpoint, I would say 25% of the time, definitely the minority of the
Yeah.
time, will anyone share who the competitors are, which I have always found, like, to your point, like, I would, there's the competitive spirit, right? For those that know me, I'm slightly competitive. And so if you told me that one of my competitors is out there and who they are, and now I've got I got a name on them, but now I just want to win, right? And like,
Right.
sort of interesting that I think that's the minority. I also think they'll do your work for you. I think that's kind of where you were going with. So like, I'll be like, well, actually, compared to Acme Software Company, this is where we're better. Now, no one's going to be like, we suck a lot worse here and here and here. Like, I think you're going to have to do some work, but I think you are going to be like, these are where they think their value propositions are. And this is where the other one does it align. So it's really interesting that you say, like, you put them out there and you let them kind of get in the, duke it out, or get on the wrestling mat together, as it may be.
Exactly.
Yeah.
King of the
But more
mat.
fight to the death. Like you want them to rip each other's arms off to some
Yeah.
extent,
Right.
but more of the
Right.
Iowa mentality than the Penn State mentality, right?
Wow. Look at that. Look at that.
I'm a
Wrestling
Midwesterner,
reference.
man, and I watched Saved by the Bell when I was little, and it was all about Iowa wrestling back in the 80s. That's probably
You
I
know
don't even
that
know if it's the thing anymore.
what's his name?
AC
AC Slater,
Slater.
the guy in real life. Like he actually was like a California state champ. He was like a nationally ranked wrestler.
Look at that. See,
Look
that's
at
why
that
it worked that
trivia.
way.
Look at the trivia.
Yeah.
Pop culture trivia.
Yeah. I actually was just talking to a procurement person earlier this week, which I guess would be yesterday, about like they were doing the old blind RFP process. And I'm like, no, I actually think like this isn't a little cartel that's going to collude and charge you more. Like these are people that all know each other, and you're actually going to get a more tailored competitive process if they're aware of it. I'm like, I still think you need to guide the process. You still got to lay out your script of what you want to see in a demo, because great salespeople will find a way to highlight their strengths and hide their weaknesses. Like you got to build around what you want to see, but let them know who they're up against, because this space is tight. Like people
My biggest
know
thing
each
on
other.
that, Paul, is like, software developers call it the happy path, right? And that's the path that we then send the solutions consultant down. So if you say, I've got 30 minutes to do a demo, and we've got 30 minutes of content, like
Yeah.
we're clicking buttons that work, right? And I think the best ones, like, from a software standpoint, which is why they probably don't like me on the sales call sometimes. Like, I want to say, what is your problem? Like, give me the
Yeah.
use case, and sometimes on the fly, right? I don't even need ahead of time, but give me the use case and make it work. And I think that's a fair ask too. Like, come to the session with the appropriate amount of time. So like, if it's a HR business partner access point, they're not in there getting trained all the time, especially if it's a manager access point, they're in there like once a year. So, go in and act like that manager. So I think that's really interesting. It's really interesting feedback.
Hmm.
When do you have them tackle price? Because that's kind of always interesting. Like, I know, Paul put together, I'll give him props, this great document, and I'm going to call him out in a second though. This great document of all vendors in different spots, right? And it has all the features and functionalities, and it's super neutral and in depth, but price isn't in there, which is always interesting, right? Because that generally matters at some point. So when do you have them in the process tackle them? Do you have them ruling people out based on, budget early, middle? Like, what's your thought there?
I think you want to find ideal scenario, you want to find the right vendor for you. And you want to kind of take like two to the finish. So like you always want to have that competitive dynamic where it's like, well, we're also talking to these guys and like we like you better because of X, Y, and Z. But realistically, you're off by $7,000 or whatever, right? But I think price is sort of the last thing because of what we talked about earlier with the spreadsheets and having the wrong solution. Like that company that bought the $5,000 ATS, like the R the ROI of having the right solution for your organization is so big, and really focusing on it, nailing implementation and utilization. So I always kind of look at price as the last thing you want to get, and hopefully you can get, you know, sort of like a better than market price by driving that competitive
Yeah.
dynamic.
And just to add to that, I think, Sean, what I often advise is wait. You do want to wait till the end because in many circumstances, price and value are correlated in our space.
Mm,
So the more expensive solutions are typically bringing more to the table
Yeah.
than the less expensive solutions. So don't preclude the value you might get out of a bigger investment.
Yeah.
Like you can decide to not do it and I'm not saying be cagey with the providers and mislead. It's more there's a difference between a bare bones ATS, a fully featured ATS. It might be that you think you're in the market for the bare bones one and you never look at the more
Yeah.
highly featured one. But when you look at like, oh my gosh, that saves me this head count, this side process eliminates this point of friction, like that's worth it then. Right. So you got to frame it less as a cost and more as what's the right investment that fits what you need. And like I always say, don't preclude people too soon
Yeah.
because you might find that it's worth it. And we're not talking about $1 million versus $50. Like in the comp tech space in particular, everything is
Yes.
there isn't anything that big, right? There are smaller solution sets, and as a result, your CFO wants to know what's right, and then you make a case for the 50 grand versus the 100 grand. Not well, we only have 50 grand, so let's not even look at like that's. I mean, I'm sure there's cases that's wrong, but
Well, I
that's where
think
we
I agree with
default.
that because I think you don't know what you don't know, right? So you, especially, I would
Yeah.
say practitioners, and I've said this before, you can be out in the market, you can look at a lot of stuff, but you've probably only worked on 10 or 15 solutions over your lifetime. So if you go out there and look at several of them, you might have that, holy crap moment. Like that is super cool. And that was only available up here. Which then can lead to other things like, is it on someone else's roadmap? How long is it going to take to implement? There's just things that are out there. My only ask from the vendor standpoint, and I truly appreciate when clients do it, is they say, hey, we're going to have a serious bake off to get in the kitchen. We want to look at 8 or 10. And can you give us kind of, I call it a trade show booth demo? Like give us your high level pitch without too much investment. Show us your best stuff, the
Yeah.
cool features, answer some questions about what we have, but it's not, all hands on deck. We're going to do an RFP. Like, sure, man, I'll do those all day. And I usually ask in return, like, give me your feedback. Like, I just want your instant feedback. Like, did you think the tool was great? Workflow was good. It was intuitive, or, oh my God, that looks like it sucks. And that part's overly complicated, because that's a good quid pro quo for us. Like, why did we not get in? That's great value for us actually for that period of time.
hmm
I
Yeah,
don't know.
Yeah.
They want to go. What I know, they always use the term. We'd like to go talk amongst ourselves, or we're going to circle up internally, which really just means they're going to talk behind our backs, right? I would rather they do that right in front of us out of the gate and get that feedback because we're gonna, if it's bad, we're going to lose right away. And I think they're always fearful that they might say, "Well, this is great," and whatever, and we're going to go have a party or something when it happens. But I think that feedback is always super welcome from the vendor perspective.
it's hard to tell people the truth. It's like dating or anything else, right? Like it's easier to just never respond, I guess, which is awful. And I will say like one of the things that frustrates me a bit is how I understand, our client base and our readership, everything is HR, right? So we and a lot of our team are ex HR professionals. But I think one thing that the community can really work on is like treating vendors and salespeople with a little bit more empathy and providing feedback. Like that's an A+ job. But even sometimes, somebody is about to sign a contract and then it's crickets for sometimes 6 months. And they're like, hey, okay, let's sign that contract. It's like, well, where have you been? Like we've been emailing you. I don't want to be annoying, but like, I thought you needed this thing going. And that sort of thing happens every day. And I think that there's a lot more value from collaboration than viewing sales and vendors as like these people who are trying to like throw stuff at me, where reality is like, especially in a fast changing market, they're one of the best sources of information. about what's going on, how to use the technology.
It's interesting you say that because our space in particular, Paul and I, before you got on, we were talking about there was someone that I didn't know in the space that was unlikely that I didn't know them. And so it's such an incestuous space. One, a lot of us have worked at other software places in here, but also even the practitioners, the network is
Mm.
not tremendously huge. And so it is, hey, you didn't buy this time. I don't think we as vendors take it as personal as they think. And it's like, that's cool. You got what you needed.
Right.
We're not for everybody. We'd like, most vendors will say they will publicly. Now I'm in trouble on podcast. But like, we might not fit your needs for that thing. And that's super cool. Like we can still talk and still be a resource and vice versa.
Yeah, playing the long game. To your point,
Right.
it's like, hey, we're all in this niche of a niche together, and we can all help each other. Careers are long.
Yeah.
So we usually did you have something else, Paul? Sorry.
I was going to ask one sort of,
Yeah.
so beyond the numbers in the demo, right? Like there are other resources, if you will, that are able. So some people ask for references. I'm kind of like, whatever. They're going to give you your best customers, of course. There are independent providers like you, like me. Um, I just wanted to seed the discussion around, and I'm pretty sure we share a mindset here. Just be careful what advice you trust is sort of my leading
Yeah.
question, because there's a lot of bias and conflict sort of in the software research, software review-ish world. So I'm sure you've got a perspective on that. This is your business as well. But I guess give your argument for what makes something trustworthy. Like when should you listen to that human feedback or that expert feedback and know that it's something that's relevant to you and not just like trumpeted advertising that's sort of, vendor sponsored, or a reference that's, obviously they're going to pick their sort of advisory customers. So like, how do you advise people on consuming that kind of feedback in their purchasing process?
It's really hard because I know the space extremely well from being in it for a while, but most of the reviews online are paid for. Like the user reviews, I would say at least 90%, maybe it's closer to 99%, is somebody that had a good experience with salesperson at their vendor and they said, "Hey, do you want to leave a review for us and we'll
Yep.
pay you $50 to leave it." And there's a lot of research that basically shows that when you do that, it's going to be a 4.9 star review. And if you go on some of these review websites, it's hard to find vendors that have, a one like a 3 star or whatever, right? Like even some of the most hated vendors in this space. On Reddit and other kind of social communities where, let's say you post in your local Sherm chapter on Reddit or whatever, what do you think about this vendor? We're trying to do X, Y, and Z. I don't know why, but there's a lot of people that just love to give their opinion that are completely ignorant of what's going on. And I know this because, especially when I started this business, I'd always DM those people like, "Oh, like, why do you love this vendor? Or why do you hate this vendor?" And it's usually like, "Well, I've never used it, but I've heard some bad things." Or we had an amazing account rep that like bought me chocolate for Christmas. Or you know what I mean? It's like not like, oh yeah, like this functionality or whatever, right? And also what's good for a healthcare business is bad
Yeah.
for a
Yeah.
education business and blah, 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 right? There's all these different permutations. I think you want to understand the economic incentives.
Yep.
So, for our business, we get paid by the vendors, right? We've worked really hard to work with every vendor. So, and that's why like our advisor team is really only in like 4 or 5 niches. Like we're not in comp, right?
Right.
Because in order to be in comp, like we want to work with like all the vendors because we don't want to just funnel everybody to like one company because it's like, all right, yeah, come to us and we're always going to tell you it's this vendor.
Right.
So and there's a lot of these like lead generator businesses where it's like, we'll tell you what the best payroll system is, like Forbes. Forbes is a massive lead gen business, hundreds of millions of dollars a year. And they're sending you to whoever pays the most. They don't know anything about Forbes doesn't know anything about payroll
Yeah.
companies, right? They're just, whatever the company is that day that's spending the most money, that's where they're sending you to. So it's really, really difficult. I think also people rely on their benefit brokers, and a lot of times these people want to be helpful, but they have no clue. I don't know if I've met more than a handful of benefit brokers who really understand anything about HR technology, but they're like, well, I play golf with this guy from ADP and he's a great guy. Like, why don't you talk to him? Or, it's that sort of thing, which is like, again, it's not like a high signal. It doesn't mean ADP is the right solution for you. So it's really, really difficult. And that's why I like doing what we do. And I think there's a, there's need for it
Yeah.
in the marketplace.
Can I pile on that? When you get down to it and you get into the final two or three or whatever, how much how much influence do you think the seller has? The buy
Mm.
like difference in account manager, do you think
A
people
ton.
are able to separate that, or do you think that's a huge like that perception of the sales process? How much influence does that have on the purchase?
So we even have data about this. So within a given vendor, we know because we make so many introductions, like this rep will have consistently 40% close rate and this rep will be 5%. And it's the same exact quality of lead, it's same exact
Mm,
introduction. So the quality of seller matters a lot. I know some vendors that track the individual they're competing against. So let's say they're in a procurement process and they know they're competing against this vendor, but they also know it's Joey. And they know that Joey's like aggressive on price, or they know that Joey's like disorganized. And so they'll try to, change their strategy based on that individual, which is like kind of the next level stuff in my opinion. But yeah, the person matters so much.
that's really cool. We usually end with, and you have a unique perspective. We usually end with this kind of this overarching question: if you could automagically, which is also a high tech term, automagically solve anything in HR, what would it be?
Oh man. I think it would be to make HR more business focused.
Mm.
And just like a friend of mine from business school got into HR totally by accident, and she is just killing it because she's this like Harvard Business School, ex private equity person who every C level's like wants to just give her a big hug. Like, oh my gosh, like you can read my income statement and understand like how you're impacting it. And she just gets stuff done. And I think that if every HR team were like that, this space would be a bit more efficient. I think people's work lives would be better. I think companies would be growing faster. I think the economy would be stronger. I think it would have like a massive impact actually on like society. And so, yeah, if we could solve that, that would be a good one.
That was the most blue sky rainbows and unicorns ending I think we could get. Um, this has been great. It's such a unique perspective. And honestly, we have Paul on here who doesn't always toot his own horn enough about having seen all this stuff. So it was good to have your perspective, which also I think for the most part does align. It just had a little more depth to it
Totally.
around the other HR, when we talk about comp, like, hey, this is what everyone in HR is dealing with. So I really appreciate you taking time out and joining us.
Yeah. Thanks, Phil.
Thank you guys. Thanks for having me. It's a lot of
Yeah.
fun. I enjoy the
Yeah.
energy.
All right, for everyone else, just if you want to, we'll tag Phil on here so you can go in, you can find his organization, and make sure you tag us, follow us, and everything else. Thanks all.
Yeah. Thank you.